Hello, everyone. It is a Monday Big Ten reaction show. We had another great weekend of games around the conference. Some teams got bowl eligible. Some near upsets happened. A controversial ending in another big game. So we've got a lot to get to here this week. I'm Marc Givler. Got Chip Minnich here with me as always. I think we have to start with Oregon, Wisconsin. We both kind of agreed on that. This was a game that, again, if you go back to last week in our prediction episode, I said I didn't see a path for Wisconsin to win, but yet I wasn't sure why the spread was so low. I thought the spread was like 6 or 7 points lower than it should be, and maybe Vegas knew something. Well, apparently Vegas did know something, Chip. I guess that's why the buildings are so tall on the Strip.
That's exactly it. That's exactly why I am always very leery about putting down money when Vegas knows something and we don't. I have to confess, last week I thought Oregon was going to roll. I credit to Wisconsin for playing this as tough as they did. I guess as an Ohio State fan would have loved to have seen if Wisconsin could have pulled off the upset, but it was a really interesting game to watch, especially in the second half.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. How much of this was Wisconsin? How much of this was just, one of my theories with college football is like, okay, so essentially you play a 12-game schedule. 2 games, you're going to play your best. Like you're going to almost unstoppable. Everything's going to go perfect for you. You're going to have 2 games where just it all clicks. You're going to have 2 games where you play absolutely terrible. And you just hope you survive those 2 games and they're timed right. They're against the right opponents that you don't, lose those games. And then like that middle 8 is kind of what you really are, like week to week. Was this just one of Oregon's 2 clunkers? Or did Wisconsin? I mean, how much of this was forced by Wisconsin and how much of this was just Oregon being off?
I think it can be a little of both. It's entirely possible that Oregon, as you said, like a clunker, they're entitled to that. I mean, the time change, we talk about it and not to make a big deal out of it, but the reality is it's out there. And I think Wisconsin at night, Wisconsin, Camp Randall Stadium is a difficult place to play, let alone at night. So I think all of those things were a factor. I think Wisconsin defensively was doing some things that was causing Oregon some issues. Obviously, they were able to eventually overcome them. But yeah, I think it was a combination of all those things.
So I'm a pretty pro Dan Lanning. Like I've always been impressed with him. I thought every time people asked me about like great recruiting assistants when he was at Georgia, I would always throw Dan Lanning's name out there. I've consistently said I think the Oregon-Ohio State matchup is going to be the matchup in the conference moving forward, as long as Ryan Day and Dan Lanning are where they are. Did he get a little nuts at the end of that game, though?
Oh yeah, I mean that almost came. It almost cost them dearly. I mean, again, the results. The fact that Oregon was able to capitalize on the way that it ended, with the interception but yeah, I mean, a little too cute, a little too like over. I always say, I'm sure you've heard the expression like overanalysis leads to paralysis. I think just kind of like, okay, let's do this. They'll never see this coming. Pulling that fake punt when all you had to do is, by and large, it's like it was the Oregon defense was playing well. The Wisconsin offense, as we saw, as evidenced by the day after, wasn't doing much of anything at that point. So I'm sure that Dan Lanning is kind of like, I probably overthought that one.
I'm always of the opinion of like when you're on the plus side of the field like that, like when you're driving in the red zone like that, just line up and go for it if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Like I would rather trust like Dylan Gabriel and my receivers and my running back. Like I would rather trust those guys to pick up a 4th down than resort to the fake. But I also think it said a lot about their respect or lack thereof for Wisconsin's offense that they would even try that. But because at that point you're just daring them to go down and kick a field goal and then have something crazy happen in overtime and you walk out of there with a loss. But I actually think it's good Oregon won because I love the idea of 1 versus 2 in the Big Ten championship. I love that idea just for the hoopla of that game. And that's not guaranteeing that Ohio State's going to win out and get there. But let's face it, even if like Indiana upsets Ohio State, well, then Indiana might be 2 at that point. So like, I think you're in a position where you're going to get a 1 versus 2 in the Big Ten championship. And I think that's great.
No, I never thought about it that way. The fact that obviously, like we haven't done our staff predictions yet for the Ohio State Indiana game, but yeah, a little shocker here. I'm thinking Ohio State is going to win. But getting back to the point that you raised, that I never thought about the fact that, okay, Indiana, if they do pull off the upset, and let's face it, I mean, it's it's a rivalry game at the end of the year, but I think Purdue is pretty much done. So I think Indiana, if they do pull off the upset against Ohio State, yeah, at worst they would be number 2 in the country. But getting back to your point, I think if Ohio State does win out, gets to Indianapolis, you've got a 1 versus 2 matchup
rematch.
I mean, it's like, this is, I mean, like the hype and, the fact that it's at night, all the other conference games, for example, the SEC plays in the afternoon. So it's like all the eyes of the college football nation will be on the Big Ten championship, especially if it is, like you said, a 1 versus 2 matchup.
You hinted at it there. I love the scenario where the SEC championship game is like the undercard. I absolutely, I love it that it could be an undercard. It's like, yeah, okay, this is nice. Like you've got like 2 top 5 or 6 teams playing each other, but the 1 versus 2 matchup later tonight is the one you're all going to want to watch.
It's one of those things where like the SEC, I mean, I know that, like on CBS, like that championship game was always big time hype. And I'm just wondering if they're going to be able to, I mean, they'll do their best. I mean, let's face it, the ESPN PR machine is kicking into overdrive now in terms of like trying to hype up like how many SEC teams should be in the playoff and all of that. They're going to try to hype that game up, but it really depends. I mean, because right now the SEC, who knows like how it's going to wind up, which 2 teams are going to be in the championship game. Whereas like you said, if you've got either a rematch of Oregon, Ohio State, or Oregon, Indiana, more than likely you're going to probably have a 1 versus 2, So I think I think the hype will be justifiably on the Big Ten.
Yeah. So yeah, I was surprised by the Oregon-Wisconsin result. I didn't give Wisconsin much chance, but Vegas knew something. The flyover, the long flight continues to be a thing in the Big Ten. But Wisconsin fires their offensive coordinator after the game. We talked about this last week.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't back this move anymore. I couldn't have been more against the move to begin with. Like you had something that has been working since I've been watching college football since I was a small child, which is just power running game, big mean offensive line, play great defense. You can recruit those types of players where you're at. You don't have to like go to South Florida to get them and try and fight all the SEC schools for them. You can get the big linemen right at home. Like just do that. And if you're going to modernize the offense a little bit, it's not like flipping a light switch. You can't just go, okay, we were this yesterday and now we're completely something different today. You have to gradually get there. You have to like bridge that gap, both from a schematic standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint. And they were just like, nope, we're just, we know we've got Braylon Allen, but we're going to be air raid. And it's like, what are you doing? And so they finally fired Phil Longo. I think this is a move that may end up saving Luke Fickell's job at Wisconsin long-term.
Oh yeah. I mean, like you said, I was stunned that Luke Fickell, because I'm going back to the fact, I'm going to take Phil Longo out of the equation for just a brief moment, is that when Luke Fickell was at Cincinnati, not that his offense was this dynamic throw the ball all over the field type of offense anyway. So it felt like you are kind of going against something that you believe in yourself. Maybe not necessarily as passionately as Barry Alvarez or, some of the other Wisconsin coaches that preceded him, but it felt like Luke Fickell was kind of abandoning what I thought was kind of, again, he was more of his roots. I mean, he's a defensive guy. So like, usually it's like, okay, we want to, I would think as a defensive coach, you want to play, you usually have a conservative mindset. Okay, let's run the ball, control the clock, etc. So switching back to Phil Longo, like I said, I think it was just kind of such a radical departure, and it just did not ever seem to fit. Didn't seem like it was going to be successful. I'm just kind of curious if this was something where he's maybe, because you have your finger on the pulse and your eyes and ears a little bit more attuned to what Wisconsin is doing on the recruiting side. If they knew something like, okay, that they were starting to, like you said, miss out on some of those homegrown talented offensive linemen, or if they felt that, something, if we pull the plug now, that we can salvage our recruiting and kind of get back to the way things used to be. I don't know. I mean, with 2 games left and they're fighting for bowl game eligibility, I mean, we'll see what the results are going to be, but I guess, better now than never, because I mean, Luke Fickell, I think he was really starting to recognize the fact that this was not working.
Yeah, and like, let's be clear, I don't think anyone thinks they're going to fire him this year. But I think long term, like he would have went into next year with a pretty hot seat. And I just think this may end up saving him. I'm personally surprised. Like, Luke Fickell grew up in Columbus, Ohio. He played at Ohio State in the mid-90s, like at the very height of like the Ohio State Wisconsin battles with like Ron Dane and like Barry Alvarez, and like the very height of that. He played against those teams. He coached against those teams at Ohio State. He's about the last person I would have guessed would have just not recognized what Wisconsin's all about and kind of what you kind of need to do to win there. It's just shocking to me that was lost on him. But he's corrected it, we think. We'll see what they do long term in terms of coordinator, in terms of what direction they want to go with the offense. But this had to be, they had to do this. Like, if Luke Fickell didn't want to go down with the ship, if he wanted to actually survive there, he had to do this. This was a disaster.
Do you think, and this is, again, I'm not trying to stir the pot, but do you think the possibility of a former Wisconsin quarterback, Darrell Bevell, who spent time in the NFL, coordinator, and again, like when it comes to, obviously somebody that knows what that program's all about. He played under Barry Alvarez, so it's like a respect and an understanding of the tradition, and a respect and an understanding of what works and what doesn't. But also, I'm not saying that he was a horrible coach in the NFL, but he had that NFL experience that maybe that might be a better bridge in terms of, okay, we need to, yes, run the ball and recruit big offensive linemen. We have to take advantage of the talent that we have here, but we also have to improve our passing game. Do you think that, I mean, because that's a name I realize, like when it comes to social media rumors, that's, when it comes to those kind of things, do you think that that's a possibility? Because I completely agree with something former Ohio State linebacker Joshua Perry wrote on social media, just to kind of paraphrase. He's like, I think this is probably the most crucial hire that Luke Fickell has to get right. That like you said, like the seat was starting to get warm, and now, okay, like maybe he's bought some time. Maybe he's back in I don't want to say that he was ever out of the good graces of the athletic administration, but maybe by making this, like he's kind of giving himself a longer runway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'll be the interesting thing, is if they go that direction with sort of a compromise between what Wisconsin has historically been and maybe modernizing things a little bit. That's very possible. I just know that when Luke Fickell arrived at Wisconsin, he did 2 very unpopular things. He didn't retain Jim Leonard, and he basically scrapped 30 years of offensive success to go in a totally new direction with a guy who doesn't have a great track record. Mm-hmm. I was reading something after he got fired the other day or yesterday, and he had Dawson Knox when he was at Ole Miss. He had Dawson Knox, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown are like the two biggest freaks of nature in like the NFL right now at receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and Elijah Moore in their offense, or they went 4-8 at Ole Miss with that talent on offense. Like, this to me was a strange hire from the get-go, both in terms of philosophy and in terms of just his track record wasn't that good. It's not like he was some like air raid genius that was like successful everywhere and like you just brought it in because he was like the cool shiny new toy. It didn't really make any sense from the beginning. So he's corrected the error on that. But what you said, what Joshua Perry said, 100%. Like, if he doesn't nail this now, again, we get into these things with administrations in college sports, and a lot of times administrations, athletic directors, they'll go down with the ship because they're too married to the hire. And so, how married is Wisconsin to that hire at this point? Because if you're an AD and you have to you make a disastrous hire and you have to fire that guy, it doesn't reflect well on you. So, if you're the AD, you're riding this out, hoping it gets turned around so that you look better too. So we'll see kind of how that dynamic plays out here over the next year. But yeah, I think we could absolutely be looking back, in 2 years or something, be like, yeah, he's like Fickell literally saved his job by doing this. Nebraska USC. Oh boy. We said it was a must win for Lincoln Riley. We said if he lost this game, we weren't sure if he'd be left, be told to be locked out of the stadium afterwards or anything, but we knew it would be the beginning of the end. If the beginning of the end hasn't already happened yet. And they won, but asterisk next to this one, Chip, that looked like a hell of a hold.
Oh yeah. Oh, it was, I think you're being generous. I honestly, watching it, and I want to give USC some credit in the sense that best case scenario, which to the average person like you or I, and obviously the legions of Nebraska fans who felt, okay, that was pass interference, that should have been automatic first down. Now keep in mind at the time there was only 5 seconds on the clock when that play took place. So it's like, okay, you're talking an untimed down. So let's say best case scenario, Nebraska scores. Then the pressure of the 2-point conversion. So that's kind of where I fall, is that, okay, it was an uphill climb for Nebraska to not only score the touchdown, but get the 2-point conversion. That being said, the Big Ten owes Nebraska, Matt Rule, their football program, an apology, because it was just, and the fact that, even the announcers were like, okay, what did we just see here? How did USC get away with that one?
Yeah, that was nuts. And kind of funny because there's been this little conspiracy going around. It's a vocal minority. It's not like a big thing, but I've seen comments from these Pac-12 newcomers that the Big Ten's doing everything in their power to suppress the Pac-12 which of course is hilarious because Oregon's undefeated. But
exactly,
and they're getting all the calls are going against the old school Big Ten teams in these matchups, and then that happens. But yeah, you're right. Look, they were climbing a mountain, and we don't know if they would have reached the top, but we know if the avalanche that hit them, aka the horrible non-call there, we know that prevented them from possibly reaching the top of the mountain. So yeah, you can't say they definitely would have won the game, but that was egregious. And we'll see. I guess this is the thing now. So you've got, with these two teams, these are obviously blue blood programs, so much history and tradition of these programs. Neither one's been, USC's been a little better than obviously Nebraska over the last, let's call it 10, 12 years. But neither one of these programs has been nationally relevant for a while. Who is feeling better right now about their situation? Is USC feeling better about their situation, or is Nebraska feeling better about their situation? Because they both, Nebraska started great and now they're sputtering. USC's been just all over the place. like if you're a Nebraska fan or USC fan, whatever, like which fan base should be feeling better about the situation they're in?
That's a really good question. I never thought about it that way, because I guess my immediate answer, like in the short term, I would think that probably USC, because in their mind, they're thinking, all right, all we've got to do is win these next 2 games and we're going to a bowl. Okay. But I would say long term, I would think Nebraska, because, and maybe I'm grasping at something here, is that yes, they're stuck in neutral and they have been for a long time. But I think the improvement is significant compared to what you saw on the field from a Scott Frost team to Matt Rule. And I mean, we're going to talk about this later this week. Like the fact that we're just talking about with Wisconsin, like I think Nebraska, they're going to have an opportunity to host Wisconsin, get to the magic number of 6. But I just think Nebraska, I mean, with Dylan Raiola, I think Matt Rule, the long-term trajectory, I think he gets Big Ten football better than Lincoln Riley does. Maybe I'm mistaken, but to me, what I see with USC is they just don't have the physical linemen on either side of offense or defense right now to be able to compete successfully in the Big Ten. Whereas I think Nebraska, they're getting it, and Matt Rule gets it. That's just my opinion.
I probably have a little bit of confirmation bias here because I really liked the Matt Rule hire, and I've been a fan of Matt Rule's over the years. So I think it's Nebraska as well. You've got the young quarterback, you're recruiting better. You've kind of mobilized your fan base in the NIL space, I think, a little bit better than what might have been the case otherwise. This stretch they're going through right now is kind of brutal after their start. There were people talking about them being a Big Ten championship game contender, like, a month into the season. That's obviously not come to fruition at all, but I agree. When I watch them play, and I've watched them several times this year now, like when I watch them play, they look much more competitive to me. Like, I know they've had a clunker or two, but like they just look so much more competitive than, like, the end of the Scott Frost era was so brutal. They were getting crushed. They didn't look like they knew what they were doing on either side of the ball. It was a mess. And so I think Rule has stabilized things a little bit. Now, this isn't going to be good enough moving forward. Like, he's kind of like put himself in a spot where, like, the 5-1 start or whatever it was, like, there better be another step next year. They better not be sitting here at 5-5 in the middle of November next year. So there's got to be another step. So the pressure is going to kind of continue to ramp up on him. But I agree. I would bet on Matt Rule right now before I would bet on Lincoln Riley. USC is significantly worse now than they were his first year.
Yeah, and for all of
not just Caleb Williams.
Right. For all of the, like he's kind of like that quarterback whisperer reputation that, say what you will, like I know Ryan Day, I like the way that he put it, kind of paraphrase Coach Day when asked about the 12 p.m. kickoffs, and they were like, oh, like the fans, and he's like, well, I already hear it from the fans enough about other things. But Ryan Day, say what you will, like his reputation as a quarterback developer, whisperer, whatever kind of positive adjective you want to say, he and Lincoln Riley were kind of like in the same, we'll just say in the same neighborhood. Lincoln Riley's reputation for that is well deserved to take a few steps down in my estimation, because of the fact that, oh yeah, I mean they won against Nebraska, but the whole Miller Moss thing, they've had quarterback decommitments, they've had, I mean, it hasn't been as stellar of a transition as I'm sure the administration thought when they invested heavily in Lincoln Riley to pry him from Oklahoma and bring him out there.
Yeah, I mean, he lost a bunch of games with Caleb Williams last year. He put all his eggs in the Malachi Nelson basket coming out of high school. That didn't work. Malachi Nelson has since transferred and doesn't look to be anywhere near the prospect people thought he was. So that was a big, big miss there. Miller Moss takes falls on the sword for everything this year. Their defense is better. People went a little nuts at the beginning of the year about how much better it was. It's still not great. And I think it's one of those things about expectations where it's like they were so bad under Alex Grinch. No one was going to come in and be worse than that. No, anyone off the street was going to be better than that. So they've moved in the right direction defensively, but it's still not a good defense. I mean, they still, when push comes to shove, they don't get the stops against good teams. I mean, we saw, Penn State in the second half, they couldn't figure out how to stop Tyler Warren. I mean, just kept getting the ball to Tyler Warren in different situations. Like, would someone, all you got to do is cover 44, find someone to cover 44, and you might win that. You probably win that game. And it's just, they've had some defensive letdowns this year too. But they are better, but it's not like, oh, they're on the cusp of like a championship defense. It doesn't feel that way to me. Their recruiting class is falling apart in front of our very eyes right now. They lost a ton of good defensive players in this class. Now they're losing other guys. They're going to lose a quarterback. Like, I would feel much better about Matt Rule's trajectory right now than Lincoln Riley's. Lincoln, I think, is being protected by a buyout right now that's pretty astronomical, even for the money USC has. But I would sleep better tonight if I was a Nebraska fan than a USC fan, even after that debacle on Saturday. Other news, Penn State game went as we thought. Mm-hmm. Just crushed a Purdue team that's kind of given up on the season. Ohio State handles Northwestern, which we'll get to in a second, just very briefly. But Rutgers and Washington bowl eligible. I think two programs that are going to be excited about that for different reasons. But, Rutgers has been up and down. Great start. Kyle Monangai gets injured. Season kind of spirals a little bit on him. Really nice road win against Maryland. Win by 2 touchdowns. Kyle's back. Bowl eligible. I really think Shiano's doing a good job there. I don't know what Rutgers' ceiling is in this Big Ten. I think in the old Big East, it was obviously a little bit higher. You didn't have quite so many obstacles in play in the old Big East. Right now you're going against, Ohio State and Oregon and Michigan and Penn State. And I mean, you got to get through 6 or 7 blue bloods just to get into the, top half of the conference. But it just feels like he's meant to be at that place, and it's like a perfect match.
Yeah. I mean, we were just talking earlier about Luke Fickell and, kind of recognizing the identity. I'll say what you will about Greg Schiano. He gets what works at Rutgers. I mean, it worked his first time. That's why I'm not surprised it's working his second time there. The fact that, okay, pretty solid on defense, commitment to the running game, passing game isn't really that scintillating, but it works. And as far as like the ceiling, I mean, let's face it, it's always going to be the luck of the draw or the lack thereof, I should say, in terms of like how the schedule now, the way it works. I mean, Rutgers was one of those teams preseason that everyone was looking at their schedule and like, man, like the fact that they don't have to play, Ohio State and like the Big Ten East gauntlet that Rutgers used to run into that was keeping them from getting on to bigger and better things. They no longer have to do that. Well, now it's going to be a matter of, all right, well, what teams do you draw within your respective Big Ten schedule? So I'm happy for Rutgers, I guess, as far as like this year, the fact that they've got their bowl game qualification. Now they can concentrate on trying to improve their bowl game destination by winning out because, okay, let's face it, 8-4 looks a heck of a lot better than 6-6. So it's like, in terms of probably a better bowl game opponent, probably a better bowl game venue for Rutgers if they win out their last 2 games. And as far as Washington, they can breathe a sigh of relief. Probably has to be in the back of their minds. They won't say this, but probably like, okay, the fact that we got to a bowl game after all the change and upheaval of Okay, losing our coaching staff, losing our star quarterback. Oh, by the way, we're going into a completely different conference. I mean, all those things, getting to 6, and they also, like, this next week, they're going to be off. And we talked about Oregon at the beginning of the podcast. That's always an interesting game. Now, granted, it's going to be, not until a couple weeks from now. But my point being is that Washington, they can kind of pat themselves a little bit on the back, the fact that they got to bowl game eligibility in their first year in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they've needed this. We talked about it a little bit last week. Like, you lose your coaching staff. They lose. I talked about this a little bit during the season. Like, Washington is a good program, but that is not a program that has recruited at a level such that they can just overcome the just enormous amount of talent they lost, both to the NFL draft and then lost some guys to the transfer portal. They're not a program that has recruited over a 5-6 year window that can just reload and snap back from that and win 10, 11 games again. Like, you lost a ton of talent. Like, you have a lot of dudes in the NFL right now off that team last year, starting, making plays, doing stuff. So this was always going to be a really tough year for them, but it was imperative that they get into a bowl game at least, because you don't want the narrative to be that this program was entirely just Kalen DeBoer being amazing, and now you're going to go back to the depths of whatever. So huge win for them. Get them back on the right track. They'll again be in a bowl game. We'll see if they can do something magical against Oregon in a couple weeks. Just wanted the show. We got a little shout out at the end of the show. Ohio State wide receiver, second-year wide receiver Carnell Tate. As many know, but some who don't really follow Ohio State may not know. His mother was killed last year, and that is just a devastating thing to go through for anyone, but especially you went off to college, like, you're trying to find yourself as a person, as an athlete. You're trying to get yourself to the next level. You're a highly touted recruit, and you just have this tragedy hit you. And he returned to Chicago this past weekend for the game against Northwestern at Wrigley and scored 2 touchdowns. And it wasn't forced. It was like flow of the game stuff. Just had a tremendous game. I just want to shout out Carnell Tate. As a kid I covered as a high school recruit, and really good person. And Chip, obviously, that's been a tough situation for him and his family. But wasn't it? It was really cool to see that, I thought, on Saturday.
Without a doubt. Like, again, as an Ohio State fan, so excited when Carnell Tate, verbally committed, and just the fact that, okay, he was so highly recruited, and okay, like, this guy is going to be, one of the better wide receivers that the program has seen recently. And then the tragedy struck him, right before the beginning of the 2023 season. And I'm going to give him credit. I mean, like, the way he responded, I mean, in terms of, as a typical freshman, I mean, he wasn't a focal point of the offense, but I mean, those issues never seemed to become something that could understandably have been a bigger factor. And like you said, this past week, I was very much hoping that Ryan Day and the offensive coaching staff were going to not necessarily force it, but try to give an opportunity to showcase Carnell Tate in front of his hometown family and friends. You would know better than I heard something like roughly upward of like 20, maybe like 25, 28.
It was about 30. It was about 30 family.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. So it's like,
30 family friends.
I mean, obviously, besides people that you and I work and write with, that went, I know a few people that made the trip because it was okay. Like, this was, like, an opportunity to see a game in Wrigley Field, but right. Cycling back to Carnell Tate, like, the fact that he was able to have such a tremendous game in front of family and friends. And like you said, it wasn't forced. I mean, Tom Orr's picture of that one touchdown reception, Tom does a great job anyway, regardless, but that was awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the feel-good stories of the college football season, regardless of who you're a fan of. That was a cool moment for everyone involved, and as someone who got to know Carnell a little bit, and unfortunately his late mother during the recruiting process, that was really cool to see. So shout out Carnell Tate for a tremendous homecoming there on Saturday. We will be back on Thursday with our predictions for the weekend. Another good slate of games coming up. Obviously, the headliner being Ohio State and Indiana, which just feels like a Big Ten championship semifinal at this point. It essentially is. Winner of that game almost, I don't know if they lock it, but it's like pretty much a certainty that they'll be in the Big Ten championship game. So that'll be a big one, but we'll get to all the other games as well. But appreciate everyone that's been enjoying these, watching and listening to us go around the Big Ten. Again, I'm Marc Givler, Chip Minnich. We're signing off. We'll see you on Thursday.